February 28, 1944. Royal Air Force, Debden, England. 40 miles north of London. The cold pre-dawn air echoes with the deep rumble of Packard Merlin engines warming up along the flight line. But these aren't Spitfires. They're brand-new P-51D Mustangs, still carrying the scent of fresh factory paint. Most of the pilots climbing into their cockpits have never flown this aircraft before. Not even once. No test flights, no quick laps around the airfield. Standing beside the lead plane is a 26-year-old lieutenant colonel with calm nerves and fierce determination in his eyes. His name is Donald James Matthew Blakeslee, and he has just made a promise to his commanding general that should make every man on this flight line uneasy. He vowed that his pilots would have these new fighters fully operational within 24 hours of arrival. He swore they'd be combat-ready by morning. And when General William Kepner asked how they could possibly learn to fly an unfamiliar aircraft so fast, Blakeslee's answer was shocking and bold. They would learn how to fly them on the way to the target. Just 4 days later, these same pilots would escort B-17 flying fortresses over Berlin. It would be the first time single-engine fighters completed the 100-mile round trip to the German capital. That mission would change the air war over Europe forever. It would mark the beginning of the Luftwaffe's downfall and prove that one man's faith in a machine could turn strategic bombing from a deadly gamble into a powerful warning. This isn't a story about how technology defeated Germany. It's the story of how a former Royal Canadian Air Force pilot, who joined the fight before the U.S. entered the war, turned a good fighter plane into the Luftwaffe's worst nightmare. It's about how strong leadership, clever tactics, and unshakable confidence in his aircraft and men allowed Don Blakeslee to achieve the impossible. Carry the air war straight to Germany's heart and never turn back. The North American P-51 Mustang was never meant to be a high-altitude escort fighter. When its prototype first flew on October 26, 1940, it was built for a British request for a fast, low-level fighter bomber. Powered by an Allison V1710 engine producing around 1,000 horsepower. The early Mustang performed brilliantly below 15,000 feet, reaching speeds of up to 386 mph, faster than almost anything in the sky then. The British admired it for ground attack and reconnaissance roles, but above 20,000 feet, where bombers faced their fiercest battles, the Allison Mustang struggled. Its single-stage supercharger couldn't push enough air at high altitudes to keep its power. At 25,000 feet, where Luftwaffe fighters stalked the bomber streams, the early Mustang was outmatched, outclimbed, and outrun. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190. The Royal Air Force came up with an idea. What if they replaced the low-altitude Allison engine with something built for high-altitude performance? What if they installed a Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same powerful two-stage, two-speed supercharged engine that made the Spitfire legendary? In October 1942, Rolls-Royce engineers in England completed the first conversion, naming it the Mustang X. The results were remarkable. The aircraft could now reach speeds over 440 mph at 28,000 feet. Its service ceiling climbed to 42,000 feet. It rocketed upward during climbs, handled smoothly even in thin air, and most importantly, it kept the Mustang's famous long range. Across the Atlantic, North American Aviation was paying attention. They started their own conversion program, using American-built Packard versions of the Merlin engine. The Packard V1650-7 produced 1,190 horsepower at 3,000 RPM and could reach 1,720 horsepower in emergency power mode. By June 1943, the new P-51Bs were rolling off the production line in Inglewood, California. Each was powered by a Packard Merlin and armed with 450 caliber Browning machine guns in its wings. The Merlin-powered Mustang had incredible performance, but what truly made it revolutionary was its fuel capacity. The P-51B carried 184 gallons internally, plus an 85-gallon fuselage tank behind the pilot and two 108-gallon drop tanks under the wings. Altogether, that was 401 gallons of fuel. At economical cruise settings, burning about 60 gallons an hour, the Mustang had 7 hours of endurance, enough to fly from England to Berlin and back, with time to fight over the target. No other fighter in the world could do that. The P-47 Thunderbolt, even with drop tanks, struggled to reach 600 miles. The P-38 Lightning, though fast and heavily armed, was unreliable in Europe's cold skies and often suffered from Allison engine failures at high altitude. Even the Spitfire, magnificent as it was, remained a short-range interceptor. The P-51B Mustang could now follow the bombers anywhere and protect them the whole way home. But in late 1943, when the first P-51Bs reached England, they weren't sent to the 8th Air Force's experienced escort groups. Instead, they went to new units in the 9th Air Force, which focused on tactical missions. The Pentagon, in its usual bureaucracy, classified the Merlin Mustang as a tactical fighter, simply because, earlier, Allison-powered versions had been used for ground attack. Never mind that the new version was completely different. Never mind that the 8th Air Force was losing countless crews over Germany because no fighter could escort the bombers all the way to the target. Rules were rules, but one man refused to accept that. His name was Don Blakeslee, and by December 1943, he had been fighting the Luftwaffe longer than almost any other American pilot alive. Donald James Matthew Blakeslee was born in September. November 11, 1917, in Fairport Harbor, Ohio. As a boy, he watched the Cleveland National Air Races only 30 miles from home, mesmerized by the speed, the noise, and the boldness of pilots pushing their machines to the limit. He knew even then that flying was his calling. In 1938, at 21 and working at the Diamond Alkali Chemical Plant, Blakeslee saved enough money with a friend to buy a Piper J3 Cub. They joined a flying school, trading instruction time for use of the plane. Blakeslee loved flying but had no money for an aviation career. When his friend crashed the Cub in 1940, Blakeslee made a choice that would shape his life. In October 1940, he crossed into Canada and joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. America wasn't at war yet, but the Battle of Britain was raging, and he wanted to fight. He finished pilot training and was sent to England in January 1941, where he joined No. 401 Squadron of the Royal Air Force Flying Spitfires. He was very good, earning a Distinguished Flying Cross and piling up combat hours quickly. In June 1942, he moved to No. 133 Squadron, one of the 3 RAF Eagle squadrons made up of American volunteers, and by August he was promoted to squadron leader. When King George VI visited the Eagle squadrons to present awards, Blakeslee stood before the king and received his Distinguished Flying Cross from the monarch's own hand. By September 1942, the Eagle squadrons had proven themselves again and again. The RAF now had 3 squadrons of experienced American fighter pilots, and the United States Army Air Forces badly needed them. On September 12th, the 3 Eagle squadrons transferred to American command and became the 334th, 335th, and 336th Fighter Squadrons of the 4th Fighter Group. 8th Air Force. Blakeslee took command of the 335th with the rank of captain. He'd flown Spitfires for more than 240 combat hours and understood air combat at a level few pilots ever do. He believed, without doubt, that aggressiveness wins. Defend bombers by shooting attacking fighters. Yes, but better to kill the enemy before he reaches the bombers. Better yet, to catch him on the ground. And best of all, to make the enemy so scared of you that he stops coming up to fight. The 4th Fighter Group started out with Spitfires, painting U.S. Army Air Force's stars over RAF roundels. Later they switched to P-47 Thunderbolts. Blakeslee hated the P-47. Magnificent in many ways, rugged and powerful, but not the plane he wanted to fight in. Guns and an incredible ability to take heavy damage. But it was bulky, it lacked range, and to Blakeslee, flying it felt like sitting in a bathtub compared to the quick, agile Spitfire. By January 1944, Blakeslee had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and placed in command of the entire 4th Fighter Group. He was just 26 years old. His orders to his men were clear and fearless. "We're here to destroy the Luftwaffe and shoot the Germans out of the sky. And that's exactly what we're going to do." But first, he needed better planes. He needed P-51 Mustangs. In December 1943, Blakeslee was temporarily assigned to the 354th Fighter Group, the first to receive Merlin-powered Mustangs, to help introduce the aircraft into combat. He flew the P-51B for the first time and immediately fell in love. It had everything he'd ever wanted. The speed of the Spitfire, the long range he'd never had, crystal-clear visibility for formation and combat flying, crisp and responsive handling at every altitude, and, most importantly, high-altitude performance that could match or beat anything the Luftwaffe had. When Blakeslee returned to the 4th Fighter Group at the end of December, he had only one goal: to get his pilots into Mustangs as soon as possible. He pushed General William Kepner relentlessly. The 4th was one of the most experienced fighter groups in the entire European theater. They'd been in combat since September 1942. They deserved the best. But Kepner resisted. Official policy said that new fighter groups would get Mustangs, while veteran units would stay with their P-47s. Switching to a new plane required ground school, familiarization flights, and weeks of training, time during which the 4th would be grounded and unable to fight. Blakeslee made a daring promise: "Give me the aircraft, and my pilots will be operational in 24 hours." Kepner thought he was out of his mind. Blakeslee's answer was pure steel: "We'll learn how to fly them on the way to the target." Knowing Blakeslee's record and understanding the potential advantage, Kepner finally agreed. On February 28, 1944, the 4th Fighter Group received their brand-new P-51B Mustangs. True to his word, Blakeslee had them fly in combat the very next morning, February 29th. Some pilots took off with less than an hour in the new aircraft. They learned engine controls, gun setup, fuel management, and formation flying while heading straight into enemy territory. 4 days later, on March 4th, the 4th Fighter Group escorted B-17s and B-24s to Berlin. It was the first time single-engine fighters had made the 1,100-mile round trip. The Luftwaffe came out in full strength. Blakeslee's men scored multiple confirmed kills, but more importantly, the bombers got through, dropped their bombs, and made it home with losses that were heavy, but acceptable. On March 6th, they did it again. This mission would become the turning point. 680 bombers attacked Berlin in broad daylight, shielded by hundreds of fighters, many of them P-51 Mustangs. The Luftwaffe scrambled to defend their capital, and a massive air battle exploded across the German sky. When it was over, American fighters claimed 75 enemy aircraft destroyed. The 8th Air Force lost 69 bombers, painful losses, but the Luftwaffe's were far worse. 160 fighters gone. Pilots they could never replace. Don Blakeslee became officially recognized as the first U.S. Army Air Forces pilot to fly over Berlin in a single-engine fighter. 2 days later, at only 26 years old, he was promoted to full colonel. But Blakeslee understood something deeper than most commanders. Flying Mustangs to Berlin was a tactical success. Destroying the Luftwaffe entirely was the real strategic goal. And that couldn't be done by waiting for them to attack the bombers. It had to be done by hunting them wherever they hid. In early 1944, Major General James Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force and made a game-changing decision. Fighter escorts would no longer be tied to the bombers at all costs. Their new mission was to destroy German fighters. On the ground, in the air, forming up, fleeing, it didn't matter. Hunt them, crush them. Make the Luftwaffe too afraid to fly in their own skies. Blakeslee embraced this new doctrine with fierce determination. He created a tactical method that stunned everyone who witnessed it. During large bombing missions, he would keep his Mustang high above the chaotic dogfights, circling and listening on multiple radio channels. From that vantage point, he could see the whole battle unfold beneath him. Friendly formations, enemy dives, new threats forming. Then he'd key his mic and give sharp, precise commands, directing squadrons to intercept, reposition, or strike, controlling the swirling fight below like a master chess player guiding pieces across a vast three-dimensional board. Pilots were amazed at how he never lost track. Dozens of aircraft, multiple skirmishes happening at once, friendly and enemy groups merging at 300 miles per hour. Yet Blakeslee always seemed to know where everyone was. His leadership style in combat was just as intense. "I'm going to fly the tail off every one of you," he told his men. "Those who keep up, good. Those who can't, I don't want them." He led from the front, flew more missions than anyone, took the same risks as his men, and never demanded what he wouldn't do himself. The results were astonishing. In April 1944, the 4th Fighter Group's 336th Squadron alone claimed 26 enemy aircraft, destroyed and 16 damaged in a single mission, the highest total ever claimed by a single squadron in U.S. Army Air Force's history. The 4th became the first fighter group in the European theater to surpass 400 confirmed kills, then 500, 600, and 700. They were unstoppable. By the end of April 1944, just 2 months after receiving their P-51 WW2 Mustangs, WW2 Historical 4th Fighter Group had achieved over 500 victories. The Luftwaffe was bleeding pilots faster than they could be replaced. Aircraft production under Armaments Minister Albert Speer continued, even increased, but planes alone couldn't win the war. Pilots took years to train, and Germany no longer had years. They didn't even have months. Worse still, they lacked the fuel to train new flyers properly. The strategic bombing campaign, long debated after the war, had found its winning formula. The goal wasn't just to bomb factories. The true target was the Luftwaffe itself. Attack German oil production, force the Luftwaffe to rise and defend, then annihilate their fighters in combat. Repeat the process until no German fighters were left. Once the skies were clear, everything else could be bombed freely. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 30.3% of its single-engine fighters. In February, it lost 56%. The losses were devastating and impossible to sustain. By spring, Germany was locked in a losing war of attrition, and everyone knew it. The technical details of the Mustang tell part of the story. The P-51D, the definitive version introduced in the summer of 1944, was armed with 650 caliber Browning machine guns carrying a total of 1,840 rounds. Each gun fired 850 rounds per minute. When all 6 opened up together, the P-51D unleashed 100 rounds per second, creating a deadly cone of fire that shredded anything within 200 to 300 yards. Its Packard-built Merlin engine produced 1,490 horsepower under normal conditions and 1,720 at war emergency power. The 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger maintained pressure at altitude, allowing the Mustang to reach 437 feet at 25,000 feet. It could climb at 3,200 feet per minute and soar to nearly 42,000 feet. With external drop tanks, its range extended beyond 1,750 nautical miles, an endurance no German fighter could match. By comparison, the Luftwaffe's mainstay fighters were falling behind. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G could hit 398 mm at 22,000 feet, but had less than 2 hours of endurance. The Focke-Wulf 190A could rival the Mustang's speed at low altitude, but struggled above 25,000 feet. Both were deadly, but both were built for quick interception, not the long-distance duels that Mustangs could fight all day. Another decisive factor was fuel quality. American aviation gasoline was 130 octane, later boosted to 150 octane depending on the blend, allowing higher pressures and greater power without engine damage. German fuel, meanwhile, kept getting worse as Allied bombers pounded their synthetic oil plants. By late 1944, German fighters were running on lower-octane fuel that severely limited their performance. But raw numbers and specifications alone don't explain everything. They don't explain why the 4th Fighter Group under Blakeslee's command became the highest-scoring American fighter group in Europe. They don't explain why German pilots began avoiding fights with P-51s whenever they could. And they don't explain why. When Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring saw Mustangs flying over Berlin, he reportedly said, "I knew the war was lost." The real answer was leadership. Aggressive, relentless, and inventive leadership that grasped one timeless truth. In air combat, the side that strikes first strikes hardest and never stops striking. Wins. On June 21, 1944, Don Blakeslee led 65 P-51 Mustangs on the first shuttle mission from England to Russia, escorting bombers across Poland and landing at the Soviet airfield in Pyryatyn. The flight covered over 1,470 miles and lasted more than 7 hours. It demanded precise navigation across unknown terrain, with 19 folded maps crammed into Blakeslee's cockpit. They faced poor weather and enemy fighters, but not a single bomber was lost under his protection. These shuttle missions proved both the Mustangs' unmatched endurance and the 8th Air Force's new ability to attack Germany from multiple directions. The Luftwaffe could no longer predict where the next strike would come from, or even where the Allied fighters would land afterward. The psychological toll on German forces was immense. Through the summer of 1944, the 4th Fighter Group continued tearing through German skies. They strafed airfields, wrecking aircraft on the ground. They bombed rail lines, bridges, and convoys. They provided cover for Allied troops after D-Day. They hunted and destroyed any Luftwaffe plane they could find, with a ferocity that made them legends. By September 1944, senior U.S. commanders realized that keeping top aces like Blakeslee in constant combat was unsustainable. Too many elite pilots were being lost. Experienced leaders were irreplaceable. Blakeslee was finally ordered to stop flying combat missions. By then, he had flown more missions and logged more combat hours than any other American fighter pilot of World War II, over 500 operational sorties and more than 1,000 combat hours. He had been wounded 9 times and earned 9 Purple Hearts. Yet he was still alive, still eager to fight, still restless for the next mission. On November 19, 1944, Don Blakeslee left the 4th Fighter Group. Officially, he was credited with 15.5 aerial victories and 2 on the ground. Many historians, however, believe his real count was far higher. He often credited kills to younger pilots to build their confidence and morale. He never painted victory marks on his planes, never named them, and never sought fame. He had only one goal: to destroy the Luftwaffe. The numbers tell the rest of the story. From January through May 1944, the Luftwaffe lost thousands of fighters and hundreds of their most skilled, irreplaceable pilots. By June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied air superiority over Western Europe, was absolute. The Luftwaffe managed only a few token missions against the invasion beaches, the largest amphibious operation in military history. With thousands of ships and hundreds of thousands of soldiers exposed on open sand, went ahead almost completely unchallenged from the air. The Luftwaffe had already been defeated months earlier, high above Germany. The results were staggering. The average monthly loss rate for 8th Air Force heavy bombers dropped from 5.1% in 1943 to just 1.9% in 1944. Bomber crews who once faced a 77% casualty rate now had a 74% chance of surviving a 30-mission tour. The difference was clear. Fighter escorts that could stay with them all the way to the target and bring them home. By the end of the war, the 4th Fighter Group under Don Blakeslee's command had destroyed more than 1,000 enemy aircraft, both in the air and on the ground. They remained the top-scoring American fighter group in the entire European theater. 14 of the 15th Air Force's 15 fighter groups eventually switched to the P-51 Mustang. Only the 56th Fighter Group kept their P-47 Thunderbolts, largely out of pride in their combat legacy. Over 15,500 P-51 Mustangs were built during World War II. They flew in every major theater and served with distinction in air forces around the globe. But it was in the skies over Germany, escorting heavy bombers deep into enemy territory, that the Mustang cemented its place in history. Don Blakeslee retired from the United States Air Force in 1965 with the rank of colonel. He went on to serve in Korea, commanding the 27th Fighter Escort Wing and flying F-84 Thunderjets. Even through the jet age, he remained devoted to combat aviation. Yet he avoided fame, refused interviews, and rarely spoke about his wartime record. His daughter later explained that he simply never wanted praise for doing what he believed was his duty. He passed away on September 3, 2008, just 8 days shy of his 91st birthday. On September 18th, his ashes were laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. The 4th Fighter Wing performed a flyover in tribute. The story's ironies run deep. A plane originally built as a low-level tactical fighter became the greatest high-altitude escort in history. A pilot who enlisted in a foreign air force before his own country entered the war became one of America's most decorated aces. A unit formed from ex-RAF volunteers became the deadliest U.S. fighter group in Europe. And at the center of it all was a man who never sought fame, never marked his kills, and gave credit to others, because all he ever wanted was to destroy the Luftwaffe. The enemy, as efficiently as possible, became the symbol of aggressive fighter leadership that defined an era. The P-51 Mustang didn't beat the Luftwaffe by itself. Strategic bombing, better logistics, huge industrial output, tactical innovations, and the courage of thousands of airmen all played their parts. But the Mustang made it possible to take the fight right to Germany's doorstep and keep it there until German air defenses crumbled. And Don Blakeslee showed everyone how to use that power to the fullest. On the morning of February 28, 1944, when Blakeslee told his pilots they'd learn to fly the Mustang on the way to the target, he wasn't reckless, he was deliberate. He knew his pilots were seasoned combat veterans. He knew the Mustang handled well and was forgiving. He knew the Luftwaffe would not wait around while the 4th completed a slow training program. He knew every day of delay meant more bombers lost, more air crews who never returned, more missions ruined because fighters couldn't reach the target. So he took the risk. He staked his pilots' lives, his own reputation, and his group's fighting power on the belief that experienced pilots could switch to a new plane quickly under pressure. He was right. Not because the P-51 was childish to fly, it wasn't, but because his pilots trusted him completely. When Don Blakeslee said they could do it, they believed him. When he led from the front, they followed. When he demanded excellence, they delivered. That's leadership. Not speeches, not slogans on squadron walls, not red tape about proper transition schedules. Leadership is knowing your people's limits, giving them the tools they need, removing obstacles, and then trusting them to finish the job. Blakeslee did exactly that, and it changed the air war. The Luftwaffe never recovered from the spring of 1944. They built more fighters, but could not train pilots properly because fuel was scarce. They developed advanced jets like the Me-262, but could not field them in numbers that mattered. They fought bravely to the end, but they fought a defensive, losing war. Allied fighters dominated German skies so completely that by 1945 the Royal Air Force resumed daylight bombing for the first time since 1940. Don Blakeslee and the pilots of the 4th Fighter Group flying P-51 Mustangs helped make that happen. Not in one night or single battle, but through hundreds of missions, thousands of combat hours, and unrelenting pressure that never let the enemy recover or accept that today's victory was enough. The mission was to destroy the Luftwaffe. They destroyed the Luftwaffe. Mission accomplished. The P-51 Mustang was a remarkable aircraft, arguably the finest piston engine fighter ever built. But airplanes alone don't win wars. People do. People who understand the mission, who commit themselves completely, who reject limits, lead by example, and never quit. Don Blakeslee was one of those people. When the Luftwaffe saw Mustangs over Berlin, they weren't just seeing a new airplane. They were seeing the embodiment of his will, his aggression, his relentless determination to take the fight to the enemy and never look back. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.